So, welcome back again after your coffee break. You will notice that Thierry de Lescaille has made a slight metamorphosis, and he's actually being represented now by his colleague Konstantinos Kostapoulos, who is working on the wildlife estate project that you've heard about earlier. So I sort of use my role as a moderator to just put questions on the table and not then let anyone answer to them. So what I'll propose to do is I'll turn to my panelists and ask them to give a reaction, and then I'm going to open the floor to the audience for further questions, reactions, debate. Before I do that, I just want to abuse my role as a moderator one more time to point out that we've just hit the 145,000 mark with the Nature Alert campaign, which means that it's official now, the most new records in terms of formal input into a commission consultation. So feel free to spread the word. Where shall we start? I propose we'll start on the right of the panel and then work our way in this direction. So, do you still remember what I asked you at the beginning?
Be so kind to repeat it.
How relevant are the military training areas in this day and age as a substantial part of the conservation strategy, given the changing nature and conflicts? And you already indicated there is a change in use. So, should we focus on improving existing sites? Should we focus on the afterlife?
Now I remember. Well, both. And you already answered part of the question yourself. Obviously, the changes in the military do not only affect the closing down of military training areas, but it affects also the nature of the training itself, and going away from big land-based operations to more, I would say, guerrilla-style light and fast operations, and that is being trained at a number of sites. And of course, they use different machinery and different equipment, and have much less of an imprint on the sites themselves. So I know, and I think I could point this question to my colleagues from the Ministry of Defense in Germany. I know that you've been dealing with these issues on some of your bases. I know the Americans have in Bavaria, where they have created artificial villages to simulate fights, like housing fights, yeah, from door to door. But on the other hand, the big tank and firing ranges have disappeared partially, and they have to somehow come up with different land use solutions to make up for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Konstantin, do you want to?
Yes, thank you. If I remember correctly, your question related to the field margins and whether those farmers who select to use a field margin are more disadvantaged vis-a-vis others who do not, in the sense that, you know, the field margin is a piece of land which is not cultivated, it's not producing anything. To that question, I would think that if you take into account the fact that those farmers who use a field margin can benefit from Pillar 2 financing, and if you also take into account the fact that the field margin provides, you know, for the benefits from pollinators, then I think the equation would be rather in favor of those who do use a field margin rather than the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you. And Konstantin, I'll be coming to you next, so make sure you have some questions ready.
Okay, I think you asked about how to solve the dilemma of the controllability of EU funding. We have, and it was quoted often, concerns from the European Court of Auditors about abuse of EU funds on the one hand, but on the other hand of ineffectiveness of EU funds, and it seems to us often that there is a contradiction, or it's very hard to achieve both objectives. So one, I think there's 2 points what you can do about it. One is really to move into more result-oriented measuring of success. So maybe, and there are some examples, but few, and they're not very much encouraged yet. So for example, not necessarily standing next to each farmer and see at which moment in time the farmer is mowing or is doing this or doing that, but rather check what kind of biodiversity is established in the grassland, for example. Of course, it is a bit more, maybe there's also levels of errors that you can have if you base your results on the outcomes, but with a bit of the necessary trust also that I think we need in this, you achieve more with less administration and control when you really look at the outcomes of the measures. I think in the cohesion policy and also in life, I think there's good examples how you can look at results, outcome indicators, and not only at the process indicators. So there, I think it is important to have an exchange of experience and best practice across the member states, but also across the different EU programs. The second is more about interpretation of and communication of this argument, because we have seen, of course, we have read the original quotes of the European Court of Auditors, but then this is translated into statements from Directorate Generals of the Commission. So, for example, DG Agriculture, when they lead informal first talks with agriculture administration from the member states on the rural development programs. It is normal that there are informal talks in the beginning of such a process, but often the environment side is not on the table here. And there are sometimes indications where the Commission says, okay, well, this is very hard to control. We are not sure whether this will be really accepted. So some encouragement, or on the other hand, disencouragement for certain schemes we have observed from the Commission. And then this goes into the national level, or in Germany, for example, into the regional level, where you have the Agriculture Ministry then talking to the nature, to their colleagues from the nature departments, that they have heard that Brussels is unlikely to accept this scheme because of controllability issues. So actually it's word of mouth that is already kicking out a number of schemes before they even make it into the program that is sent to Brussels. Because of course in the ministries people are very much afraid of getting problems because of controllability, and often then the minister or the higher levels in the ministries kick out measures that have a risk of running into problems. So for this, I think it is very important that the Commission makes up its mind in terms of guidance on balancing the issues, effectiveness and controllability, and clearly communicates to everyone how this should be handled. And the second solution actually is something that we propose also in a discussion paper that we have established as NABU about future financing of biodiversity. However you organize it, either through a dedicated EU fund or through an improved integration approach, the environment side should sit at the table when rural development programs are adopted, so they can make the case for the effective measures and can also propose ways of controls that work. But if it's only dealt with by word of mouth or through many different levels, then often the most effective measures are lost.
Thank you very much. And request to come in there.
I would like to add something to this and just illustrate the difficulties of the CAP with a short example. A couple of weeks ago I was at the meeting with the German Association of the Shepherding Association. And they said, well, you know, we are willing partners on all kinds of military training sites and other conservation sites, but we can only do it if we get the first pillar payment, because otherwise it's not profitable and it's just makes no sense. So you have to have your areas declared as agricultural properties. And then they said, well, you know, but the restrictions from the European Commission are so tough that they practically make any sensible or, operation of business as we do as shepherds impossible. For example, they're not allowed to move. There's a restriction about the transport of animals on weekends. So, but obviously, if it starts to rain, they have to get the animals off the grassland and get it to the barn or so. So they have to be able to move the animal on weekends. Secondly, if they want to move from one property to the other, sometimes they have to use public roads, and that is and if a herd of sheep walks on public roads, the shepherd has to clean up the road afterwards because of the manure that these animals drop sometimes. And these are all like, and they said, you know what, these are all things that haven't been paid attention to, you know, just very practical matters that make life very difficult for us and make receiving agricultural payments difficult for us, because we constantly have to fight for exemptions from laws that were originally written to help us. And now we have to deal with all this paperwork to be able to get our sheep somewhere safe when it starts to rain, you know. So I think this is very interesting if you once get the perspective of the land users themselves that are willing to cooperate with nature conservation, but they're impeded by these kind of practical matters.
Yeah, that's raising a couple of interesting points. I presume there are also road safety reasons why you need to do something with the remains of herds of sheep walking over public roads. But I want to open up the floor now, the discussion. So both on issues of agriculture, also touching again on the issue of, is the CAP a reformable policy or not? If yes, how? If not, what do we do instead? Matters of energy. I think I'd like to keep it wide to make sure everyone who has an interest can be. This would be the moment to raise your hand if you're having any questions, reactions, comments. Are we to have the shortest panel debate of the conference? Ah, good. The gentleman over there, and then after him, a lady here in the front. And just please introduce yourself, who you are and where you're from.
Andrejs Briedis from Latvian Fund for Nature, a member organization of EEB. I've been following the CAP reform process for now more than 2 years, also involved in all the things happening here in Latvia. And somehow this starts me to remind more and more of seems to be or believed to be an Indian proverb on riding a dead horse. So the question to the panelists, maybe we should all agree that the horse is dead and get off of it and stop pretending that we are getting somewhere with this horse, dead horse, called CAP. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that may react. Anyone in the panel who wants to react on that one? Feel like getting off a dead horse, or disagree you're sitting on a dead horse? If not, we'll take Okay, we'll take a few more and then we'll come back. I'm proposing to do it just direct, normally reaction, but in this case we'll take one more question and then.
Thank you. Chris Sarato from the Federal Government Germany Environment Ministry. I was missing a little bit in the agricultural debate or let's say in the ELO presentation and maybe in the whole discussion, the original idea of the biodiversity strategy to use the ecosystem services argument to really go contact and convince land users. This is maybe it is a vision because we were not successful with this argument in the CAP. I don't know how it was taken over. I think it was not even thought about it. That's sometimes my impression. And the question is, because this is linked also to the financing aspect. There is this slogan of public money for public goods. But of course, from an economic point of view, it would be the best to give the money where we get the most out of it for the whole society. Maybe not for one farmer, but for the whole society. And this is something we have to push, I think. And my question to the panelists is, how could we bring this picture, this argument, more to the land use policy? This is for forestry, the same for fisheries, the same. It's not only agriculture, of course, but now agriculture here is the main aspect. This is also linked, of course, to the very, very big challenge to review the ecologically counterproductive subsidies we all face. And we know that the farmer, that's what we experienced in Germany with the energy policy, farmers jump very quickly when they get incentives, financial incentives. It's not that they stick from a traditional point of view all the time. No, they jump very quickly if they get money for something. So there is the chance that we combine all this to move farming in the right direction. And of course, this is on CAP, but not only on CAP. And we have to find, with the farmer policy together, to bring in these arguments, not only from a nature protection point of view, but with this broader picture of more services or more goals we gain, climate change, flood production, and so on, with soil protection and so on, which was all raised from the ELO presentation. And I wonder how we could bring this together to find, in the end, a solution which gains for biodiversity and farmers and other social goals.
Okay, Konstantin, do you want to react to both?
Yes. So the dead horse, I'm looking at this from the biodiversity perspective, but I also doubts about other parts of the horse, depending on, and to find out actually what is the political objective of this policy. That's totally unclear to me in a way. Is it to feed the world? Is it to feed the Europeans, or to provide social aid to farmers, or to take care of the land, or to have cheap food in Europe? So under any of these objectives, I fail to see how this policy is delivering and how such an amount from taxpayers' money is justified. So I think I have to agree with you that I think we should think of something either radically reformed or new, but it's not. I think we need to approach it in different steps. So, and I think the argument of Ms. Ratte is very key. How can we achieve this change? And I'm a bit. I think we learned quite a lot also from the environmental NGOs from the last years, and there's some disillusion about this that dominates maybe at the moment. But I think we should stay rational and look at how to do it. I think at the level of the land user, of the individual farmer, we very much support the voluntary approach, the convincing about the need to take care of the ecosystem services, but for the individual farmer, the societal gains are only the second or maybe the third priority. It's the actual income and the short-term income it's the same for companies in other sectors. So actually here, the real factor is you need enough money to provide attractive incentives. So otherwise, that's the end of the voluntary approach. We talk about this with the German Farmers Union, for example, and with the forest owners who complain there's not enough voluntary approach. We say we can have a lot of voluntary approach when we have the money, but when we were fighting for the money, you didn't help us. So actually it was when we were fighting for more Pillar 2 funds, the farmers' lobby did not support this. And now there's the complaints that there's not enough incentives coming from Pillar 2. So I think that's a clear problem. And actually I must also say something about the role of my own government in a way. This is a country that was very keen on reducing the EU budget in general as a net payer. And, but when it came, and there were speeches at the highest level saying we need to make more out of this scarce money and not just spend more. But when the debate was about value for money, Germany was not the driver of reform, on the contrary. So actually the finance ministers of the net paying countries should have an interest in making sure the money doesn't get wasted. But so far they failed on this. In terms of constructive ideas, we feel, and from the nature conservation perspective, there's maybe two ways of reform. One is, and we haven't issued a final position on this, neither as NABU nor as BirdLife, but we think there's two ways. One is either to establish a dedicated financial tool for financing biodiversity action and ecosystems action, not just Natura 2000, but could also include other environmental directives that take care of ecosystems, and to take the money we need for this from Pillar 1. I must say it openly, this would be the obvious position that we take if we choose this model. And the other model is to reform, massively increase the role of Pillar 2 for nature conservation financing and involve the Environment Administration in the programming much more. So it could go both ways, so, but something radically has to change, and we start the debate, I think, in the next weeks before it's too late even for the midterm review.
Thank you. Tilmann, you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I also couldn't agree more with what Krista said, and I think it's mostly a political debate that we cannot really solve on this level. But but I wanted to just raise the horizon a little bit and give you two examples of other countries where that managed to voluntarily protect land without those financial stimulus. One is New Zealand, where there's no such thing as public subsidies for the agricultural sector at all, and yet it has a very vibrant land conservation movement, and it's mostly on a voluntary basis. The second one, and it's true that financial incentives play a huge role for the decision of a landowner whether or not to protect his property, but it's not the only factor. There are empirical studies from the United States about the motivation of landowners to voluntarily protect their properties, and surprisingly, the financial considerations ranked at the very bottom of the list. They did not play no role whatsoever, but there were other factors that were more important than the financial considerations, such as attachment to the land, family values, insecurities about the future of the property, and the fear that it might be developed one day, and so forth. And just regular, let's say, conservation-friendly, ethical attitudes of the landowner. So all these are also available to us, and the United States are a very successful role model in that sense of engaging private landowners in voluntary land conservation. They have voluntarily conserved about 15 million acres in the United States over the last 30 years or so. It's about 20 million hectares, 5 times the size of Switzerland. So, and that is all voluntary. It has to do with the tax system there, but as I said, financial considerations are not the only factor.
If I may add a few words, starting from what Mr. Tilmann was saying at the end. Yes, indeed. I mean, there are those. There is the apart from the profitability and the status, the financial status of its farm and agricultural enterprise. There are other things like tradition, attachment to the land. But unfortunately, if I take the example of my own country of origin, there were those who, and very many of them, unfortunately, who were very much attached to the land and that they had to sell and leave the countryside and move to cities. And that was, of course, under the pressure of the economic crisis. So we need, at this moment of, because the crisis is not over, not yet anyway, we need to make sure that there are those conditions which will keep people where we are, and that is next to their land, and that they will keep cultivating that land. And until that moment comes where we will be finding ourselves in a society of affluence, I think the policy has to be geared very much in that way. The European Union, of course, as you know, has set as its own priorities, the European Commission at least, growth and jobs. The other thing that I wanted to say is relates again to the profitability, and we said time and again that for a farmer and the landowner or land manager to be able to respect biodiversity and promote it, he has to have the means for it. Common agricultural policy and the dead horse, I think I agree entirely with what my namesake to the left has said. Thank you.
Okay, I think in a few months we'll have another joint position paper between BirdLife and ELO then on that question. I'm looking again at the room. I see all the way in the back. I think that's Alberto. Yes, all the way in the back in the middle.
Thank you very much. I'm Alberto Arroyo from WWF. It was very interesting to hear the whole debate, and before when Thierry was saying that he could agree with the basic parts of the presentation or the basic messages from Konstantin. The feeling all the time is that landowners are, if you want, I want maybe to say it a little bit blunt here, but more progressive somehow, and the farmers tend to be a little bit, for the environmental side, looks to be a little bit more challenging to approach to them. So if you want, this is a question for landowners, because you know them well and you work with them, how we can improve this situation. Is this simply a matter of financial incentives? Is there something else that we can think about? Thank you.
I think that's a direct question to you.
I think Thierry, before he left, he mentioned something at the very end that we need to have a value, or to value the benefits offered through the preservation and the promotion of biodiversity. If we manage to do that, and if we ensure that there will be some remuneration for this activity, then perhaps that will be partly, I say, a solution to the problem. I don't know if this answers your question. I mean, couldn't hear all of it anyway. Thanks.
Do you want to come back on that, or do you want to? Okay, we'll move. Okay, Konstantin.
Okay, as you mentioned the farmers, I want to make one thing quite clear, that we see a big distinction between the farmers and the farm lobby, which is actually an agro-industry lobby, because we work a lot also as BirdLife partners with farmers, and very successfully. And to make it quite clear, whenever the discussion now starts about how should we finance biodiversity action in the future, even if we went for the approach of a dedicated environmental fund, the beneficiaries of that would be largely farmers and those who take care of the land, and others, landowners. So the difference would be that it's distributed by the environmental administration against the delivery of certain activities and public services and public goods. So this is, whenever we criticize the CAP, it's very clear that we we are convinced we need to continue to work with farmers and with landowners, and therefore we see so much agreement also between BirdLife and ELO in many ways. So I think that's very important to see that who is making the problems at national and at EU level on for biodiversity are certain lobbies who are unfortunately not here from the agribusiness lobby.
Okay, I'm looking again around the room, and I haven't actually heard anyone speak out actually in favor of this new CAP with great passion and verve. So I'm wondering if that's telling us anything. Maybe there's someone to change that.
Thank you, and thank you for this debate. And I think there were some issues that were raised that are key for this discussion. I'm Mario Silva from the Nature Conservation Agency in Portugal. And on one hand, I think a key question was raised: what is common agricultural policy for, and what is indeed this policy pay and wills to pay in the next years? Because we have a common policy that pays for rights in the first pillar, and in the second pillar pays a support to income, and on the environmental side, the agro-environmental schemes or forestry environmental schemes or payment that for water or Natura 2000, it only supports the additional costs and compensates for losses. So there are three different levels of payments in this policy, and of course, only to pay for additional costs or loss of income will never be competitive enough to endorse and to approach all the challenges related to biodiversity and ecosystem services. And if we don't put an emphasis on shifting the support of common agricultural policy towards the services provided by ecosystems, including aesthetic services like producing and sustain biodiversity, unless this is not part of the income and we put the policy supporting the income related to ensure public goods connected to ecosystem services, or we will not be able to find any solution for this complex problem. I think we have to decide at the most apolitical level what is the direction that the next Common Agricultural Policy reform, the direction we want to put emphasis at that time, and the negotiations on the TTIP, on this partnership between the United States and the European Union, will be a very, very good pilot exercise, let's say like this, to evaluate how do we intend to support our most basic principles coming from common policies such as food security, environment, etc., and how long are we going to stand with it, and this take us to the discussion during this morning. I think the only way, and Krista raises the issue of moving towards a logic of ecosystem services payment in the agricultural policy, including for nature, instead of a loss of income or cost or additional costs payment basis. And for that, we need to put ecosystem services, nature and biodiversity, all the natural capital part of our biodiversity agenda in the semester discussions, and to reinforce the role of natural capital together with climate and resource efficiency in the greening of the semester process, and give a more strong message in this direction in the review of Europa 2020 strategy. And this is the only way, it's to shift towards payment for public goods, payment for income, support to income for environmental, food security reasons, etc., and to put it in the agenda of the Europa 2020 strategy in order to reinforce the commitment of heads of state, the Parliament, and also the Commission towards this line of policy. And this is the only way, and we are in time to have a positive shift in 2020, 2021 in this direction. We are just in time to do it, and the message we are going to do during the review of Europa 2020 and in the negotiations of TTIP will be key to foresee what will be the runway, if indeed we are sit on that horse or not. But I don't believe we are. But I think these views should be reflected in order to...
Okay, thank you very much. And that was a very broad range of issues you covered, both on the issue of are we sitting on a dead horse, and thanks for adding your perspective, but also the sort of bigger issues like the revision of the Europe 2020 strategy. What does the negotiation with the US on a major trade agreement mean to how we're trying to shape agriculture? So I'm looking around if anyone wants to come in on those issues raised. I do know that there was another point made about the issue of the rigidity of laws and the need for flexibility on ecosystems. Also looking around if anyone wants to pick that point up. I'm looking at my panel. If you want to react on any of the issues of making it broader to touch on Europe 2020, TTIP, but also the point made earlier by Tilmann about flexibility versus rigid rules, whether there are nature conservation rules or not.
I could add something.
You go ahead.
Just a quick point, and it's also a very general point. I think that we are, as Europeans, we are still in the process of developing a culture of private land conservation. It has to do with our history of nature. The way nature conservation evolved in Europe and most countries is that it was very much in the responsibility of the public authorities, whereas in other countries it was much more driven by the private or the civic sector. So again, comparing the EU with North America or the Far East, Southeast Asia, you can see that we still have this mentality of, very command and control driven regulatory instrument toolbox towards nature conservation. And in the States, the regulatory system is much weaker. They have practically no spatial planning system on a state or federal level. So it's only municipal zoning. They don't have the same development restrictions that we do, and so forth. So a lot of the let's say, weaknesses of the public system are being taken up by the civic sector, and that has been not only the case for nature conservation or environmental issues, but also cultural, educational, and so forth, healthcare. So there's a very strong civic sector, and that plays hugely into the protection of private lands. They are much better than we are in coming up with cooperative ways of how to approach private landowners. Not only farmers, but just any kind of landowners. And I think we can learn a lot from comparing our approaches. I'm not saying we should do it the same way, but it's a valuable discussion, a very healthy discussion that we can lead with people from other parts of the world about how to engage these kind of stakeholder groups.
Thanks. We have a few more minutes left, so Konstantin, you want to?
Just to continue on that, I think as far as regards the issue of the EU nature directives and succession and flexibility, I think there's been quite some debate in the last years, and also advice and guidance from the Commission, what can be done. So actually, I think a lot of the claims that this flexibility is not possible under the habitats directives are not true. I mean, you have to go through it on a case by case, but there's a lot of pragmatic and flexible solutions that you can find. But at some point, there's also a societal decision what kind of landscape you want to have and what kind of species you want to have. Nature conservation is a societal decision. If you want to have wilderness in Europe, then you have different species than if you want to have a countryside landscape, open landscape. So, but I think we can be quite happy that the EU nature legislation as a framework gives a lot of space to explore also different approaches in different regions and different member states. I wanted to add maybe on the US, I think we can learn a lot, but also there is quite a number of things I think you cannot really transfer, because the whole for centuries the balance between state and so state influence and government influence and the personal freedoms is a completely different setup than Europe, and also the space available is a bit different. So we have to be careful to compare. Well, we can compare, but there's also limits to that. I just wanted to raise one anecdote. No, it's not an anecdote. It's something that I witnessed in the fitness check consultation. In the fitness check consultation in Germany, when the Commission and the consultants came to talk to German stakeholders, there was a representative of the German Ministry of Finance who was in charge for the military training areas, and he gave a message that the NGOs would have immediately signed, because he said that the government, or his sector of government, is very happy to have the directives, and is very happy that the directives are so old, because they have had time to learn how to live with it. They are now happy to discover what species and habitats they have on their military training areas, and they are starting to employ biologists. So it was a totally positive feedback from the defense military area, so that was really encouraging.
Okay. You may remember the same statement from the German Industrial Association in Mainz. Again, the industrial sector saying we should really keep those directives as they are. We just learn how to deal with them, and we have a lot of planning security, and the implementation is well tested. So please don't touch them.
Well, there's different sectors then, of course, in the industry association, but broadly the main message was really let's work with them and not change the framework. But the industry also actually complained about the agriculture sector. This was really interesting, that the agriculture sector is treated much less strict when it comes to assessment of projects, nitrogen emissions and so on, than the industry. So interesting dynamics caused by the fitness check.
Thanks. I hope that didn't get too German specific there, but in case you want to, I'm going to look one more time, and then I'm going to ask my panelists if they want to have any further concluding remarks before I will wrap up this final part of the day. Nope, I think we've then exhausted the subject, as they say. I'd like to thank then again the panelists, particularly Konstantinos, for jumping in very flexibly at the last minute, and all of you for having stayed with us till the end. This is only day one of the conference. We'll have a second day where we'll continue to cover a lot more. I think this was a very good opportunity to go into some more difficult questions, and it seems that some of those fundamental questions around CAP reform are worth looking into more deeply, and we've heard different perspectives on that, and we don't know where it will go, but I think that the simple fact of having that debate about what are the objectives of, what should be these objectives of our agriculture policy, how do we shape that, do we start from scratch, do we reform what's there, and I think as a second point, what I take from this is that it's important to take the long-term perspective, getting ahead of the curve, thinking post-2020, thinking about, again, our biodiversity vision for 2050, where do we want to be in 2030 for that. We're already having a debate around climate and energy policy for 2030. We've heard about the targets this morning. All of that has implications for biodiversity and means that we'll need to start getting our act together on that kind of a time horizon. So with that, I would conclude and close this session. And once more, a big thanks for the Latvian Presidency for the opportunity and the invitation to be here. And let's have a nice evening.